Hi, my name is Jim Brees from GreenGrowth CPAs, and today I want to talk to you about paying payroll in cash for your cannabis business. There's a lot of little nuances and things that can complicate the process. We'll also talk about worker classification between 1099 contractors and Bonafide Payroll employees and how to mitigate 280E in the entire process. So let's hop right into the computer here and I'll walk you through all the processes and steps to paying payroll in cash for your cannabis business.
So due to federal regulations restricting cannabis operators' access to traditional banking, many cannabis companies are forced to pay their operational costs in cash. And payroll is one of the most regular expenses that can be difficult and risky to pay in cash, especially if you don't know what you're doing. So in this video, I'm going to cover with you how to pay your employees in cash as well as your contractors. But before I do, I need to let you know that the information contained in this presentation is meant for guidance purposes only and not as professional legal or tax advice. And further, it does not give any personalized legal, tax, investment, or any business advice in general. So with that out of the way, let's hop right in. Quick agenda of what we're going to cover. First, we're going to talk about determining worker classification and the importance of that, then paying payroll employees, and then how to pay payroll taxes, as well as paying contractors, those 1099 contractors you may have, as well as properly allocating time for 280E mitigation. So first, let's cover some background on worker classification. There are a few different ways to pay your people depending on how you classify your employees. I'm sure you've asked yourself, are your workers employees or subcontractors? And this distinction is very, very important. It's hypercritical to get this right. Now, Uber, the ride-sharing company, you've heard of them. Well, they recently faced a lawsuit where they tried to blur the lines between employees and subcontractors in an effort to prevent their drivers from forming a union. By classifying the majority of their workforce as independent contractors, the rideshare giant was able to prevent drivers from bargaining collectively. And the lawsuit has led to a pro-worker bill currently making its way through the California state legislature that, if passed, could redefine the relationship between worker and boss by forcing corporations to actually pay up and make it more expensive for corporations. Now, it was a big deal, and I'm sure it cost them dearly to defend against this lawsuit. So what does this mean for your cannabis business? Well, there are some costly repercussions for trying to shortchange your team by misclassifying them as subcontractors and not giving them benefits rather than traditional employees where they have access to more benefits and more payment and other things that come along with being employees. And this could expose you to lawsuits, back taxes, and further operational complications. That said, it's also true that not every worker is an employee, and there's a long list of elements to check to determine if your team member is actually an employee or a subcontractor. So let's review and take a look at some of those core elements to consider. So classification of workers. Now in this presentation, let's use an example of a cannabis dispensary, but these factors will work for each vertical in the cannabis industry. So if a person is employed at the same dispensary with a set work hours to work on the sales floor using the dispensary's equipment to perform their job description or job duties, that person is likely an employee. Now, person number two, if that person has no set hours or schedule, uses their own equipment to perform their job, and typically performs specific projects with due dates or deliverables, that person is likely an independent contractor. Now, the determination of an employee revolves around three main criteria. Number one is behavior. Now, this is the way the work is performed, such as the direction to use a specific POS system and protocols to complete transactions. And number two is financial. So what financial resources are required to get the job done? Things like, does the employee get reimbursed for driving their vehicle to a job? If yes, then likely and most potentially they are an employee, whereas a contractor covers this expense on their own. Now, this doesn't mean like their drive to and from work, but if they were driving, around to do sales calls or they're driving around to pick up product, if they're reimbursed for that, likely they're an employee. And lastly, number three is the relationship. Now, it's a bit more complex for employees compared to contractors. For example, an employee may receive perks such as health insurance and an ongoing commitment to provide a specific number of hours by that corporation. So when you look at all three of these key factors, it helps you kind of understand who is an employee and who is a contractor. In most cannabis businesses will have a mix of both employees and contractors on their team. So let's look how to take care of each group and the payroll considerations for each. So first, how to pay employees on payroll. And when we talk about payroll, we mean Bonafide Payroll, a set pay structure every period, whether that's every week, every 2 weeks, or monthly, with the associated taxes taken out. Cannot stress this enough. Your payroll must be organized because employees are expensive. There's a lot of taxes and other things that come along with it. You must pay their salaries and wages, as well as the employer portion of the FICA and Medicare, employer-paid unemployment insurance, employer-paid employment training tax, the federal unemployment tax, workers' compensation insurance, payroll processing fees, and in addition to those taxes and fees, you must file extra reports 4 times a year, meaning that your accounting expense will rise as a result of having to process those associated reports. And things may get a little bit more complicated if you're planning to pay your payroll in cash, which most of you probably do because you don't have access to a bank. So that means you can't write them checks or do direct deposit. So if you do pay your payroll in cash, make sure your employees sign a receipt verifying that they got the cash owed to them. You will need these signed receipts for proof that they have been paid, as well if you ever get audited. And if you pay with a check, then those checks or that direct deposit receipt is your evidence for that payment. Next, let's cover taxes for payroll. You must also make sure that you are allocating the proper taxes every period. Again, if that's weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, however you're paying out your employees, make sure you're allocating those taxes properly, because trying to come up with that tax money later is a big burden, because that can add up very, very quickly. And the employer is always held responsible for withholding and remitting these taxes to the state or the federal government. If an employer does not follow directions and protocol, then the employee would be an injured party and may have a case against you if you mess this up. So take this very, very seriously. And you may be asking, well, what's the best system to do this? Well, we suggest that the taxes that you collect and you hold on to and you withhold from your employees, you hold that in escrow and then send that to the IRS or to the state on whatever deposit schedules are. And this is usually, again, quarterly. Payroll taxes are prepared and remitted every quarter, 4 times per year. Now, there are 2 people you're going to be paying taxes to, the federal government and the state government. So for the federal government, you have EFTPS, and this is the digital payment portal for paying the IRS payroll taxes. And rarely can you pay your employee payroll taxes in cash. So if you don't have a bank account for your cannabis business, then you probably need to pay these personally and then pay yourself back through the company or through the business. And then you have EDD, which is in the state of California, is the Employment Development Division. And this is how you pay your state withholding taxes for payroll. In here, you have to pay everything you withheld from your employees, as well as SDI, which is state disability insurance. And you can do this via snail mail. And if all this feels a little too complicated, you can work with an accountant to help you out and do all this and do these things for you. Or instead of managing employees yourself, there are payroll and employee leasing companies who can help you out with this. Now, a leasing company helps you, quote unquote, lease employees from a non-cannabis company that does not have the 280E issues that other cannabis businesses and operators face. And because they are not restricted by 280E, you pay the leasing company to pay your people and take care of all the filings. There's usually a fee on top of the employee rates, but it's a convenient and easy way to manage your cash flow and just export that task out to somebody and make sure it's being done the right way and keeping you compliant. 2 leasing companies you may want to look into, or payroll companies you may want to look into, are ADP and Payroll USA. Next, let's cover how to pay subcontractors. Now, the process for paying your subcontractors looks slightly different. Before you pay any subcontractor, make sure that you have their completed and signed W-9 forms. This IRS form is necessary when working with an independent contractor, and if you don't have this information, you can be penalized. Now, at the end of the year, you must complete a 1099 for each subcontractor based on the total amount you paid out to that contractor. That 1099 form gets sent both to the worker that completed the work and the IRS, so that keeps everyone compliant and keeps everybody truthful. Now, each subcontractor must list every 1099 on their Schedule C form, and then their copy of the 1099 does not get filed with the IRS since they already have a copy, but it's held for the subcontractor's personal records only. And as a business, you should issue 1099s to LLCs, individuals, and partnerships, and don't issue 1099s to corporations or suppliers of your business. So for example, a landscaper who cuts the grass at your business for $500 a month will need a 1099. And for sure, any subcontractor who you paid more than $600 over the year will get a 1099. And many cannabis companies make the mistake of thinking that they don't have to issue 1099 since the operator can't get the deduction because of 280E. However, the question of being able to take the expense is a little complicated, and based on the facts and circumstances around that engagement, you may still be able to take payroll expenses and deduct that from your gross revenue. So if the subcontractor is direct sourcing of products, weighing products, packing products, or adding value to the COGS in other ways, then you can probably take that expense. But a bud tender taking the time to ring up a client and sell them product would not qualify as an expense that you can deduct from your gross revenue under 280E. So to help you with this, here are 2 helpful tools to make sure you can actually allocate time properly and get that deduction. So first, it's important to have an employee handbook to keep track of these different variables and job duties. You can use your handbook to split out the contractor's and employee's time. For example, allocate 25% of their time to X, which could be sourcing new products, and 35% of their time to Y, which is packaging new products, and etc., and on and on and on, and laying out how employees and contractors appropriate their time throughout their engagement with you. What this does is give you a methodology and evidence for delineating some payroll expenses under the 280E tax code. Now, if you want to create an even more granular allocation of time, have your employees clock in and clock out for specific activities. It does seem like we're asking a lot when you say, hey, make sure they clock in for this and clock out for that, but clocking in and clocking out doesn't need to be so burdensome. You could issue a badge solution and divide your tasks into separate rooms, right? Like a room for selling, a COGS related tasks room, and they can just punch in and punch out, and you can use that ledger or that information that comes from the security check-in, check-out as evidence on how to allocate time. It's all about using technology and evidence to create a reasonable methodology for your cannabis company to allocate those expenses for 280E. Now, quite quickly, we've covered a lot of ground on payroll and contractors versus employees, but let's talk about 4 key takeaways here. Employee classification has important tax implications for all cannabis businesses. No matter if they're employees or 1099 contractors, you're going to have different ways to pay them and different tax laws and tax things that you have to make sure that you do when they fall under a particular classification. And to understand that classification, there are 3 base or core factors, which is behavior, the financial part of it, like the resources they have to use, and the relationship between the employee and the employer. Now, the 280E expense is based on the facts and circumstances of the engagement and what that person, whether employee or contractor, is doing while working for you. And to help allocate time, make sure you have an employee handbook and even further, a badge solution to check people in and out of particular tasks at a more granular level so you can allocate that expense and deduct that from your total revenue and have lower taxable base. Now, thank you for taking the time to sit and listen, and hopefully this video has brought you some value to help you understand paying payroll and taxes and worker classification in the cannabis industry. Now, if you need help with employee and contractor payroll accounting, please get in contact with us today by visiting our website at greengrowthcpas.com or giving us a call at 800-674-9050. It's very important that you get this aspect of your payroll down right, because you don't want to have this issue snowball and become something bigger to deal with down the road. So again, if you need help with employee or contractor payroll, please get in contact with us today via our website at greengrowthcpas.com or giving us a call at 800-674-9050. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon.